presentation. Sometimes people have a good section, they're going along, chugging along, they finish a section, then all of a sudden there's almost this panic look on their face, the dive for notes, scurrying back to their computer. You don't want that. Now, I'm not worried about it sounding perfectly one sentence leading to the next. You can simply just stop, pause, walk a couple of feet, go to the next idea you have. But you don't want it to be jarring. You don't want to look like you're in a panic looking for your notes for the next section. This element is somewhat subjective, but let's just put it out here on the table. Are you boring? When you're watching video of yourself, or a colleague, or you're watching someone live, are you bored? Now, I'm not going to give you an easy out of, oh, it's a boring topic. You can make any subject boring, any subject interesting. You can technically do a lot of things really well. But if you're watching a video of yourself and you think, oh, it's boring, guess what? That's what your audience is going to think too. So we do not want to be boring. Are you engaging? Do you seem to be looking at people, occasionally asking them questions, throwing out a rhetorical question and letting people have the time to think of an answer? Too many speakers are just, here's my data, I got to get through this, I'm in a big time pinch, I've got to go through these 10 slides. No engagement at all. Big problem. You want to engage your audience, whether you're literally asking them questions and having a dialogue or engaging them in another way. This is a subset of the last point on engaging. Are you interacting with your audience? Literally. Are you walking around, perhaps talking to one person at a time? Really looking at individuals? Referencing a conversation. As I was speaking to Jose in the hall before we started, well, that's interacting with the audience. Now, Jose is sitting up listening. Everyone else is listening too because they're thinking they had a conversation with you. You might reference that. I've never heard people leave a speech and say, well, I hated the way that speaker interacted with the audience in such an interesting, relevant way. What audiences don't like is when they're ignored. So you can't do this in every single presentation. If you're speaking to 1,000 people and you've got exactly 10 minutes, you can't do it nearly as much. But you should always strive for figuring out some way of interacting with your audience. Is there a clear, focused message in this presentation you're watching? Or are you left kind of scratching your head saying, I don't know where they're going for this? The enemy of presentations everywhere, too abstract, no examples. Watch yourself, watch your colleague. Are you using examples? You need examples if you want anyone to remember your message. Relevant stories, you've heard me mention elsewhere in this course. It's the single biggest difference between great speakers and awful presenters. If you want to be an effective presenter, you need relevant stories for every single message point. So when you're watching the video, watching the speech, the presentation, really pay careful attention to, are there relevant stories or not? I was conducting a presentation skills workshop in Beirut, Lebanon, not that long ago, and one of the trainees named James said, TJ, do I really have to put dialogue in every story? And I said, James, yes, you do have to put dialogue in the story if you want it to be interesting. That's all it is. It took about 15 seconds. I told a little bit of a story, setting, character, name, actual dialogue. I didn't summarize what was asked of me. I actually said it from the standpoint of the other character, James, and what I said back, that's dialogue. Here's the thing about dialogue. We all use dialogue when telling stories all day long, but we tend to strip it out in a speech. If you want it to be more interesting, you need dialogue. Be watching for it when you're grading the presentation. Do you use good, simple words? That's what you want in a presentation. Or do you utilize fancy words like utilize when you could just use? Really watch the presentation, judge it. Are you hearing big fancy words that you typically only read? That's a problem. The simpler the words, the better for your presentation. Do you change your sentence structure? You occasionally ask a rhetorical question, like I just did right here. Or is everything boom, 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 subject, verb, object, message point, message point, message. Some people are just too consistent. They're just dumping data. If you're going to make it sound conversational, You need to change the sentence structure. Sometimes that means repetition. Sometimes it means pausing. Sometimes it means short sentences. Sometimes it means starting sentences with the same word and going in a different direction, different lengths, as I've just done right here. You want to change sentence structure so that it doesn't sound written out and memorized. Are you using biz speak? Are you using biz speak? Jargon? Ugh, that's the worst. Going forward, I will not be using biz speak. Don't ever say going forward. Just say the future or next week. As it were, makes you sound like a pinhead. Don't use all these fancy little clutter phrases. In general, avoid initials and acronyms. Just say out the full word or phrase. You can't go wrong using the full word or phrase. Use words that real people in real life use in your organization if they're in the lunchroom. Think about your audience. If everyone in your audience knows a particular word common in your industry, then it's fine, but otherwise, the simpler the words, the better. Don't try to be fancy and use extra terms you learned in business school or law school. Use the simplest words possible. Do you explain the benefits of what you're talking about to your audience? When you're watching that video of yourself or a colleague, is it clear to you what the benefit is to the person listening? If not, we have a problem. Unless you're just giving a college lecture that's purely for intellectual enrichment, you need to spell out exactly what the benefits are to the person listening to you. Is there a call to action? If you don't spell out what you want people to do, they're not going to do it. Most presentations in the work world, business world, corporate government world, you're trying to affect change. It's not going to happen unless you specifically ask for it. There must be a call to action. That's it for this presentation. Any questions? Thanks. Bye. That's not how you want to end a presentation. Sadly, that's how too many speakers, too many presenters end their presentation. You need a strong ending. It doesn't have to be funny, fancy, overly dramatic, but if it just ends with a thud, that's a problem. Mark it carefully. Here's a section on PowerPoint, what to watch for. There's other segments in this course, all the do's and don'ts and how to make more effective PowerPoint slides, how to deliver PowerPoint. But this section will just be a quick way of looking at someone else's PowerPoint presentation and figuring out how to judge it. What's your overall impression of any slide you see? Is it a good, simple slide, meaning does it have one idea, one image per slide? Or is it one of these things where you have to sort of read in complexity? You want good, simple slides. When you watch the video or watch the person, are they dumping data excessively? That's the number one problem people have when they're using PowerPoint, is it's an excuse to shovel lots and lots and lots of data, all of it instantly forgotten. Don't dump data excessively. How is the slide management of the presentation you're watching? Too many people, they act like they're just the assistant to the slide. As you can see on my next slide here and up here, that's not how you want to manage the slides. When you're speaking, all eyes should be on you. If you want to put up a slide, stop speaking and let people look at the slides. You should be introducing the ideas, not the slides. That is proper slide management. Or are you tangled up? Worst of all, are you kind of walking in front of the projector and then you're seeing all sorts of shadows behind you because you're blocking the slides? That's the worst. Does the presenter have good, worthwhile pictures, images on the PowerPoint? Now, I love text. You'll hear me talk about this in other parts of this course. But in my experience testing audiences everywhere in the world, you put text up on a bullet point slide, they don't remember it. People remember images, pictures. So judge the PowerPoint presentation you're watching. If the video or the person speaking is using PowerPoint, do the images sell the idea? Or is it missing images? Are there places where pictures should have been there, but instead the person got lazy and just put in text? Does the speaker use a blank screen? Now, this is going to be confusing to some people because they think, well, it's a PowerPoint presentation. How could there be a blank screen? Yeah. When you're speaking, people should be looking at you. There shouldn't be anything else up there. If you want someone to look at an image, put an image up. The way to do that is you can hit the letter B to black out the screen, W whites it out, or you can just build in a blank slide in between. That way, when you're finished talking about something, you just advance, it goes to a black screen, and people can look at you. You don't have to do this, but it is the most effective way. Final element on the checklist when you're watching yourself or others give PowerPoint presentations. Are you ignoring your audience? Is the speaker, the presenter, ignoring the audience? This is really a problem for so many people when they're using PowerPoint, because now instead of looking at actual human beings, they're ignoring the human beings and staring at a screen, staring at a slide. You don't want to do that. Remember, the slides are for your audience. They're not for you. You need something to trigger your memory, a roadmap for your presentation. Use a good old-fashioned piece of paper. You should not be using your PowerPoint as your notes, as your roadmap. You should be looking at your audience. So when you're watching the video or watching the person and you sense that the audience is being ignored, big problem. If you're using this checklist or some checklist and you're working with others and you're asking them to grade themselves, I want to warn you of a couple of things. If you leave it up to the individual, they'll instantly zoom in on the one or two areas they don't like. Big problem. The whole point of using this list is it puts your strengths and weaknesses in perspective. Most people are going to see that they're fine for the vast majority of the things on this list. If you get them to focus on that, wow, you're doing this well, your posture is good, your speed is good, your energy is good, it relaxes them to the point where it's just much less nerve-wracking to focus on the 2 or 3 problem areas. Let's say they had a bad close or they have a few ums and ahs. It's much easier to focus on that when you see you're doing almost everything else really well. So don't fixate on the problem areas. Look at the whole perspective and grade yourself in a fair way. Not unduly positive and, oh, everything's wonderful, but not unduly negative where all you focus on the negatives. You need a balanced perspective of what's working and what isn't working. So how do you really use a checklist like this in real life to make improvements? Let's say you've watched a video of yourself or you've watched a colleague, you've filled out the notes, and you feel like you're doing a good job. And lo and behold, you're doing almost everything well, but you see 3 or 4 areas where it's just not what you want. My recommendation, put the problem areas in priority. Figure out what your biggest problem is, then redo the speech, redo your presentation, and focus just on trying to improve that one area. Don't try to fix 4 areas at once. Try to focus on one flaw, one problem at a time, continuing to do all the things you did well. Do it that way. Record it, watch it, grade it again. Try to get improvement on that one area, and then focus on the next and the next and the next, one at a time, sequentially, until you've eliminated the defects, and what you're left with, a great presentation. In this section, I focus on great communicators, great public speakers, people who've demonstrated excellent presentation skills and are known in many cases throughout the world. Just as great writers are constantly reading other great writers and great musicians are constantly listening to their favorite bands and other great musicians, I believe people who want to be great when it comes to their presentation skills and their public speaking skills are constantly looking at other people they deem to be great speakers. Not necessarily to copy from them, but to learn from them, to get inspiration, to look at new techniques that are working, and to figure out how can you, again, not steal from them, but blend in certain things they're doing with what you're doing. So in this section, I'm going to look at 50 or so prominent speakers, well-known people, who are known as great communicators, great public speakers. Now, a caveat. This is not meant to be a definitive list of the best speakers in the world. you're going to see some deficiencies here. Most of you watching this don't live in the United States right now. And I want to apologize in advance. This list is based primarily on my own experiences. I am a white, straight male who grew up in the United States that does have a way of biasing me. So I apologize in advance. This list is not as inclusive worldwide as it could be or should be. But all I can do is give you my expertise based on my own experiences, having studied speakers for now decades. And I want to give you my sense of what I think works. I'm picking people who I don't necessarily agree with politically. I'm going to pick people all across the spectrum. I'm picking people who are necessarily good people. That one person on this list is, on most people's list, as the worst human being in the history of the planet. I'm analyzing just his public speaking skills and trying to derive lessons from what these people did well so that we can learn from them and possibly use not all, but some of those techniques. So you're going to see in this list, it's going to be biased. A lot of Americans disproportionately, a lot of disproportionately white people, and a lot of males disproportionately. So I apologize in advance, but I don't know how else I can do this short of spending another 5 years researching every single speaker and having it translated. So we do the best with what we can. I do think this is the most inclusive analysis of great speakers you're going to find in any course on this platform or any place else. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible at the beginning of each lecture, telling you what I find significant about this speaker, things they do well, but that anyone can do well. And then below, in the resources, you're going to see a URL. Typically this will be to YouTube, but it could be to other places too. I want you to watch the video, or at least a couple minutes of each speaker. Then what I'd like you to do is reflect upon it. Then go to the Q&A section of this course and type in what you liked about each speaker, but also what you didn't like. I could pick some people and you think, well, I hate that person. That person rubs me the wrong way. I would never want to listen. That's okay. It's really good to figure out what you like and you don't like about speakers, but it is good to get a real range. Listen to people you don't agree with politically. Listen to people, watch people you don't agree with theologically. Listen to people talking about subjects, whether it's cooking or fishing, that you don't care about. You can still learn from their abilities to communicate effectively. So let's hop right in the next lecture. Oprah Winfrey is undoubtedly one of the best presenters, public speakers, communicators in the entire world, and has been for decades. She got her own nationally syndicated talk show in the mid-1980s and has been a huge, huge force in the United States, the Western world, the English-speaking world ever since. And her philanthropy has had a huge impact, Africa and other places. Take a look at the clip below, and I think you can get a sense of why she's so popular, why she connects. Every time she speaks, she's communicating not just with the intellect, but with her heart, with emotions. There's an emotional connection. There's a tremendous amount of empathy that comes out on any subject she talks about. In this particular speech, you can see her thanking people in a highly specific way. She's conversational. She knows how to start slow, build to some drama, have an emotional high point in a presentation. Now, it frankly doesn't matter if she's giving a speech, an acceptance speech, interviewing someone, or being interviewed. She's always Oprah, and by that I mean she comes across as genuine, as empathetic. She shares. She's not afraid to talk about some of the worst things that have happened in her life, and she's come from nothing and had extreme poverty, other extreme horrific situations happen in her childhood. She's overcome all of that, and that's one reason why so many people relate to her. Whether she's talking about problems with relationships, family, weight, she comes across as extraordinarily genuine, compassionate, and empathetic. When you do that, when you're presenting, you're way, way ahead of the crowd. So take a look, post your comments. Nelson Mandela is one of the most motivational figures in history. He was imprisoned for 27 years, essentially for the crime of being black. Now, I've linked below to the first speech he gave after his release from prison. And what is kind of shocking to see is just how relaxed he looks, how happy he looks. You would expect someone to be bitter, angry, after having half their life lost by being in prison. treated like a criminal. And yet, when you look at, if you didn't know who he was and you didn't know the background, you would see this person speaking, and for all you know, it's a wildly successful billionaire entrepreneur talking about the latest venture. Just saying from the demeanor, how he holds himself, the smile. So sometimes how you communicate is about a larger context. Here's someone who was so mistreated for his whole life and didn't have a trace of bitterness. There wasn't vindictiveness there. That attracts the whole world. The whole world came to his cause and celebrated him. When he does speak, he has definite poise, great voice, he looks good. All of those things are important, but the far bigger issue is this sheer context of his courage, what he'd been through. Now, that's not something that you and I can duplicate. We can't all of a sudden be more credible to our colleagues at the office or the trade association by serving in prison. So I certainly don't mean to make light of it, but I want to make certain that you can't just manufacture that. Sometimes it's just a circumstance or a figure in history, and then it's about what do you do with it. He certainly made the most of it, and he used his voice to speak out. So anytime you speak, part of it is the audience is judging who you are as a person, also how you're coming across. And because of that, I think he goes down in history as not just one of the great inspirational figures, inspirational leaders, but also a great communicator, because he was so effective at communicating reconciliation, rebuilding his country, bringing people together, and not spreading more hatred and violence. Take a look. Truly an inspirational figure. Martha Stewart is a true force of nature in the world of publishing, media, entertainment, and lifestyle. That's sort of this new genre she created. Now, a lot of people say, Martha Stewart, not what I think of as a compelling, captivating speaker. She's not giving rousing keynotes, motivational speeches that often, but she has had a tremendous career on TV, now on internet video, every kind of network, every kind of channel, her own shows, broadcast syndication, cable TV, public TV, you name it, she's been there. She is a producer. So part of what I find inspiring about her is it doesn't matter if she's already rich. A couple of decades ago, she became a billionaire, at least for a while, when her company went public during the internet craze. She still went to work every day. And after that, she went to prison for some legal problems. A lot of people would have just retreated into private life after that in seclusion. She was right back out there. She is someone known for a tremendous, tremendous work ethic. Now, she's not known for being the best boss to have, but when it comes to someone who's just always out there, always speaking, she does it. Now, interesting thing about Martha Stewart, she has uhs and ums come up. It's not that she's perfectly fluent.